When you're looking at a cryptocurrency, understanding its origins, how those initial tokens were distributed, that's foundational. It really shapes the trajectory of the entire project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly where we're heading today.
Mm.
A deep dive into the early story of Cardano, specifically that initial sale of ADA vouchers between 2015 and 2017.
Yeah, and what's interesting right off the bat is that this wasn't your typical early crypto fundraising. This pre-launch effort, which focused significantly on the Japanese market, was actually one of the first to incorporate Know Your Customer procedures.
Really? KYC back then.
Yeah, that's a pretty notable step for that era.
It really is. And it sort of sets the stage for a story that's seen some recent discussion. There have been questions popping up in the Cardano community. Some have even been termed false allegations surrounding what happened with any ADA from those early vouchers that wasn't initially claimed.
Right.
So our goal today is to carefully examine what we know, try to stick to the verified information available, and really understand the journey of this early ADA.
Exactly. We're looking at a few key pieces of information here. We have an official update from IOG, the company behind Cardano's development, via their newsroom.
Okay.
We also have a clarification issued by Emergo, a founding entity of Cardano, that was shared on Binance News. There's a really informative Reddit thread where Cardano's founder, Charles Hoskinson, has also commented.
Yes.
And we're looking at discussions on the Cardano forum. We'll also be drawing on some broader context about Cardano's initial token distribution.
Okay, so for you, the listener, our mission is basically to provide a clear and fact-based understanding of this whole ADA redemption program. We want to address those community questions directly, but crucially, we want to separate what has been verified from any speculation.
Definitely need to be careful there.
Yeah, we're committed to accuracy and want to avoid getting drawn into unverified claims. So let's start at the beginning. These initial ADA voucher sales. What was the fundamental purpose behind them?
Well, zooming out to the big picture, the primary goal of those sales, which spanned from 2015 to 2017, was quite simple: to provide the necessary funding for the very early research and development of the Cardano blockchain.
Makes sense.
And while the sale had sort of a global reach, it's important to note that there was a significant focus on Asia, with Japan emerging as a particularly engaged region.
And it wasn't just a single event, right? It was structured in several phases, as I recall.
Precisely. There were 4 distinct phases or tranches of the sale. And as we mentioned earlier, a key characteristic was the early implementation of KYC.
That KYC part again.
Yeah, and this wasn't just an informal agreement. The entire process underwent independent audits, which, for the crypto space at that time was a significant move towards accountability.
That's an important detail. So roughly how much ADA was distributed through this initial presale?
The figures are pretty substantial. Approximately 25.9 billion ADA were distributed through these voucher sales. To put that in perspective, that represents a considerable 57.6% of the total eventual supply of ADA.
That's a majority share right from the start.
Okay.
And what was the price point for those early supporters? Was it fixed?
It varied slightly across the 4 phases, but it generally ranged from around 0.002 to 0.003 per ADA in the initial stages.
Oh,
The entire sale operation was managed by a Japanese company called Cord. This really highlights the significant role that the Japanese community played in the early days,
right.
with estimates suggesting around 94.8% of participants reportedly coming from Japan.
Almost entirely Japan then.
Yeah.
Okay, so a significant amount of ADA was distributed via these vouchers. What was the original process for people to actually claim their tokens?
So the initial redemption process was designed to be on-chain, meaning it occurred directly on the Cardano blockchain itself.
Right on the chain.
Yeah. This period lasted from September 2017, following the launch of the Cardano mainnet, up until July 2020. The process was, in theory, quite straightforward. Individuals who had purchased vouchers would input their unique voucher codes into the Daedalus wallet.
The main wallet back then.
Exactly, the official Cardano wallet at the time, to redeem their corresponding ADA.
That sounds relatively simple. So what led to complications down the line? What changed?
Well, the major turning point was the Shelley hard fork in July 2020.
Shelley.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how technical upgrades, while intended to improve the system, can sometimes create unforeseen challenges. The Shelley fork brought significant enhancements, decentralization, staking.
Big upgrade.
Huge. But it also had an indirect consequence. It rendered the old Byron-era addresses, where any still unclaimed ADA from the vouchers resided, essentially incompatible with the original redemption mechanism. They just wouldn't work anymore for that.
Oh, okay. So a technological advancement actually created a new obstacle for those who hadn't yet claimed. What was the solution to that then?
Right. So to address this, the Allegra hard fork, which took place on December 16th, 2020, included a specific technical function. It was called Return Redeem Address Store Reserves.
Catchy name.
Yeah. This function essentially moved all the remaining unclaimed ADA from those now incompatible Byron addresses into Cardano's central protocol reserves.
Into the reserves, okay.
Not much are we talking about.
We're talking about approximately 318 million ADA, which sounds like a lot, but it was about 1% of the total presale distribution.
Okay, so the unclaimed ADA was moved to a holding area within the Cardano system. But that still didn't get it to the individuals who hadn't claimed it yet. What was the next step?
Exactly. Recognizing that there were still legitimate voucher holders out there who hadn't redeemed their ADA and that the original on-chain method was now, well, defunct for them.
Right.
DIOG initiated an off-chain redemption program. This program ran from October 2021 until much more recently, March 15th, 2024.
Off-chain. Okay. That implies a more centralized approach compared to the initial on-chain redemption. What is the reasoning behind that shift? Well, according to IOG, the move to an off-chain process was primarily driven by technical and security considerations. The original on-chain mechanism had apparently become vulnerable in some way. So the new approach was described as a careful and discreet off-chain process. And, importantly, it was overseen by independent auditors and had the support of the Cardano Foundation and eMergo.
So it wasn't just IOG acting alone. Who was responsible for managing this off-chain redemption effort day to day?
IOG established a dedicated team specifically for this purpose, and they collaborated with independent legal and, interestingly, private investigation firms.
Private investigators, really?
Yeah, they even engaged 3 different investigation firms at different times, particularly to assist with outreach in Japan, given, the high concentration of original voucher holders there.
Wow, okay. That sounds like a very proactive approach. What kind of methods were they actually using? Were they knocking on doors?
It sounds like it was multi-layered. It included direct outreach to individuals who were identified as likely eligible claimants. They'd be informed about their unclaimed ADA and guided through a secure off-chain process to facilitate the transfer.
Okay.
There were multiple follow-up attempts, regional support mechanisms put in place, and yes, apparently in Japan, local third parties even employed investigative methods, including in-person visits to registered addresses in an effort to locate these original voucher holders.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
How successful was this off-chain program in the end? Did they manage to find most people?
By most accounts, it was a significant success. Approximately 99% of the original vouchers were ultimately redeemed through this off-chain process.
99%. It's very high.
It is. This resulted in over 300 million ADA being successfully returned to their original owners.
That's fantastic news for those holders.
Yeah.
So that leaves a relatively small percentage of ADA that remained unclaimed when the program ended in March this year.
Correct. Less than 1% of the initially distributed ADA remained unclaimed when the program concluded on March 15th, 2024. The estimate is around 18 to 19 million ADA.
Right, 18 to 19 million. Now, this is where we've seen some of the recent discussion within the community. There was a specific transaction back in October 2021 that involves a significant movement of ADA. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. You're likely referring to a specific Move Instantaneous Rewards, or MIR, transaction that occurred on October 23, 2021.
MIR, okay.
Yeah, this transaction involved the transfer of approximately 318.2 million AD, basically that unclaimed amount from Cardano's protocol reserves, into 6 designated stick addresses. Think of an MIR transaction as a specific type of on-chain action that allows for the swift movement of funds for predefined purposes.
Gotcha.
In this case, the redemption process.
And what was the started purpose of moving this ADA into these specific stake addresses?
The clearly documented purpose, according to the on-chain metadata associated with the transaction, was to facilitate the ongoing off-chain ADA presale redemption process. The metadata explicitly labeled these funds as being for ADA presale redemption escrow.
Escrow. Okay, that suggests a secure holding mechanism. Were there any preliminary steps taken before this large transfer, like tests?
Yes, it appears there were. Prior to the full transfer of the 318.2 million ADA, each of those 6 designated addresses received a small test transfer, just 188 each.
Okay, chapping the pipes.
Exactly. Suggests a level of due diligence to ensure the addresses were correctly configured and ready.
And who was responsible for managing these escrowed funds once they were there?
The management of these escrowed funds was handled by IOG's support team. They were responsible for distributing ADA to individuals who were successfully verified as legitimate claimants through that whole off-chain redemption process.
Really on a case-by-case basis.
Precisely. And interestingly, these escrow addresses were also delegated to staking pools operated by a company called wavepool.digital.
They were being staked. So these funds were actually earning staking rewards while they were held in escrow.
That's correct. Over the period that these addresses were delegated, they accumulated approximately 26.6 million ADA in staking rewards.
Okay, 26.6 million in rewards. Now, this is an area where some of the transparency concerns have been raised, right? Why wasn't the community more broadly informed about this off-chain process and the movement of these funds, especially the staking at the time?
Yeah, that's a fair question. IOG has indicated that this decision was made with careful consideration of security implications. Basically, they weighed the value of complete transparency against the potential risk.
Risks like?
Risks of widely publicizing the ongoing individualized redemption process. Their primary concern, they stated, was safeguarding the process and the legitimate claimants from potential exploitation attempts, false claims, sophisticated social engineering attacks. The aim was to prevent bad actors from trying to take advantage of the situation.
Okay, that rationale around security is understandable, especially with individual claimants. However, it seems that the, let's say, limited public information during this period might have contributed to some of the rumors and what have been called false allegations, particularly concerning the fate of the remaining unclaimed ADA, and whether any of it was potentially mismanaged or, for instance, as some claimed, improperly donated to Intersect.
Precisely. And Charles Hoskinson has directly addressed these rumors, firmly denying any allegations of misappropriation. He has stated publicly that the remaining unclaimed ADA was indeed donated to Intersect, the Cardano community-run organization, but only after the conclusion of the redemption period.
Right, after the deadline passed.
Correct. He also expressed feeling, quote, deeply hurt by what he perceived as a lack of trust from some members of the community regarding this.
And to provide a more definitive account and address these ongoing questions, IOG has initiated a pretty significant step, correct?
Yeah.
An audit.
Yes, exactly. To ensure a clear and independently verifiable account of the entire process, IOG has engaged two highly reputable firms to conduct a comprehensive audit.
Okay. Who are they?
They've brought in the global law firm McDermott, Will & Emery, or MWE. They have a strong focus on the digital asset space and the international accounting and audit firm BDO, which is known for expertise in forensic investigations and digital asset tracing.
Those are certainly well-established and respected names. What exactly will their audit encompass? What are they looking at?
The scope of the audit is designed to be thorough and comprehensive. It's meant to cover all aspects of the ADA redemption program, from the initial on-chain voucher stuff right through to the more recent off-chain activity.
The whole 9 yards.
Pretty much. This includes a detailed examination of all relevant redemption data and a complete audit of all the funds involved throughout the entire process, where everything went.
And when can the community anticipate seeing the findings of this independent audit? Is there a timeline?
Well, according to the information available, the audit was underway as of May 2025, so fairly recently. While a specific publication date for the full report hasn't been announced yet, IOG has indicated that a complete history of the program, including all pertinent transactions and the flow of ADA, both on and off-chain, will be made public in conjunction with the audit findings.
That level of detail should hopefully provide much-needed clarity then.
Yeah.
Okay, let's revisit the remaining unclaimed ADA and those staking rewards that were generated. What's the current status of those funds right now?
Right. So as we discussed, approximately 18 to 19 million ADA remain in those designated escrow addresses from the original unclaimed pool. And the roughly 26.6 million ADA in staking rewards that were earned by these addresses are also part of the funds that are currently under review as part of this independent audit.
And Charles Hoskinson has stated publicly that the remaining unclaimed ADA was donated to Intersect. Do we have any further official corroboration of that, or is it still just his statement for now?
This is an area where the information appears to be, let's say, still developing, or perhaps requires clarification from the audit. Initial official documentation regarding the funding of Intersect, when it was first established, indicated that its financial support came from IOG and Emergo.
Yeah.
These early materials did not explicitly mention unclaimed ADA or accumulated staking rewards as a source of funding. This discrepancy has been noted and discussed within the community, so the audit should shed light on this sequence of events.
Interesting. So a point to watch. And where are these remaining unclaimed ADA currently being held? Who has custody?
Based on information that has emerged, a company named Sawyer's Holdings Ltd. Has apparently been holding the remaining unclaimed ADA in a trust or escrow arrangement since sometime in 2023.
Sawyer's Holdings Ltd.
Okay.
So, to quickly recap some of the key questions that the community has been asking and what we can ascertain based on the verified information we have. First, where is the remaining ADA now?
Okay. The remaining unclaimed ADA, that 1819 million, is currently held in escrow by Sawyer's Holdings Ltd., pending the outcome of the independent audit. The larger pool of funds that was in those 6 addresses was, of course, previously utilized for the off-chain redemption process over the past few years.
Got it. Second, will there be a further opportunity to claim this remaining ADA, and what will happen to it eventually? Is the door still open?
The official off-chain redemption program concluded on March 15th, 2024, so that door seems officially closed. The final disposition of the remaining ADA after the audit is still, technically, to be fully detailed and confirmed by the audit report. As we've noted, Charles Hoskinson has stated it was donated to Intersect post-deadline, but the audit's findings should provide the definitive clarity on this.
Okay, audit confirmation needed. And third, what about the staking rewards that were earned on the escrowed ADA, that 26.6 million ADA?
Right. Those accumulated rewards are also part of the funds being examined in the ongoing audit. Their final allocation will likely depend on the audit's conclusions and whatever subsequent decisions are made based on those findings. It's all part of the package being reviewed.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Finally, the question of why the ADA was staked in the first place while in escrow. Any further insights on that, or just speculation?
Well, there's no definitive official statement on this specific point yet that I've seen. However, the most plausible explanation for staking the escrowed ADA is, frankly, to preserve its value over the extended duration of that multi-year redemption program.
Just practical financial management.
Seems likely. There has been some discussion within the Cardano forum. A user named NeoSpank suggested this, for instance, that the staking rewards might have been intended to offset potential legal or administrative costs associated with the complex redemption process. And also, to ensure the principal amount of ADA remained as intact as possible for the claimants. But it's important we stress this is a plausible inference, maybe even likely, but we should consider it speculation until the audit provides more detailed information or IOG clarifies directly.
Right. A reasonable theory, but await the facts.
Right.
Okay, let's take a moment to synthesize this. It's evident that the ADA redemption program was, well, a substantial and long-term undertaking. A really complex process.
Absolutely. Years in the making and execution.
And it appears that the vast majority of the initially distributed ADA was successfully returned to its intended recipients, which is the main goal, really.
Over 99% based on the figures released.
Yeah. However, that small portion that remains unclaimed has, perhaps understandably, become a focus of community discussion and, at times, concern.
Agreed. And I think a crucial point to emphasize here, especially given the nature of crypto, is the importance of relying on verified information, particularly when discussions involve financial matters and community trust. This upcoming independent audit, conducted by reputable and experienced firms, is a really significant step towards providing the factual data needed to address many of the outstanding questions and hopefully allay any lingering concerns based on speculation.
It also brings into sharp focus that inherent balancing act that cryptocurrency projects often face, doesn't it? The desire for complete on-chain transparency.
The ideal, yeah.
Versus the practical necessities of security and discretion when dealing with sensitive operational processes like individual asset redemption for potentially vulnerable holders.
That's a key observation. There can be legitimate reasons, as argued by IOG here, why a fully open on-chain approach might not always be the most secure or effective method in certain situations, particularly when dealing with a diverse group of individuals with varying levels of technical understanding and security awareness.
Right, protecting people from scams or errors.
Exactly. That need can sometimes necessitate more controlled, albeit less publicly visible, procedures. It's a trade-off.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the early ADA distribution and redemption, it really prompts a broader reflection, I think. Considering the complexities and the lessons learned from this initial phase of Cardano's history, what potential implications might this have for how future cryptocurrency projects approach their initial funding and community engagement strategies?
That's a good question.
Especially concerning this delicate balance between the ideal of open on-chain visibility and the pragmatic need for secure and effective operational decision-making when handling sensitive processes. It certainly underscores the ongoing dialogue within the decentralized space about where that balance should ultimately lie, doesn't it?